How can a coherent culture come about? I want to suggest that the essential start is to be able to have a dialogue. In this way, people in different subcultures could come together to dialogue, to share their meanings, perhaps to emerge with new meanings that would be common. We have to begin with people who are open enough to start the dialogue. We cannot begin with those who don't want to. We need a place where people could get together merely to talk without trying to solve any problems, simply to communicate, to share, and see if they can come to a common understanding. There is no set form or practice to establish communication except to engage in communicating itself and then encounter the problems of trying to do that. Also, if we say that we want to communicate, but we give first priority to solving a certain practical problem, this will limit us. Behind every practical problem, there are assumptions that may stop us. Some of the things that we want to communicate may not be compatible with these assumptions. Let us therefore say that we want to communicate, and we're not going to give first priority to solving any problem. This reminds me of a story I read many years ago. An anthropologist was studying a North American Indian tribe. He observed that they got together in a circle frequently, 20 to 30 people, I suppose, and they would talk. There was no agenda, no decision-making, no authority. They would stop talking at a certain point, and the anthropologist did not understand the stopping point. However, when they stopped, they all seemed to know what action to take because they understood each other so well. We cannot do this now. There are probably too many people, but our meetings are much more difficult when we try to get people to really work together. Imagine people all getting together even in one country. We cannot do it even in one family, much less between countries, cultures, religions, because we are unconsciously committed from the very outset to doing the opposite. This is the point. It is not an accident we find this so hard. We try to overcome this commitment, but this means that we are unconsciously resisting the very thing we are trying to do. This resistance is in our memory and in the whole system, including our whole culture. And it is not coherent. It is counterproductive to try to do something and hold back at the same time. I think we have to transform the culture by starting with the nucleus, a small group of people that might make a new culture, or might start to make one anyway. As I said, to do this is not really a practice, but a constant situation of learning creatively in communication. As we begin to share meaning, we will also share values and develop a common purpose. If everyone understands the same thing, we could all work together. If we all see it differently and have different ends, we cannot do it. The real trouble is, as I've already said, that we do not have a coherent culture. We have to begin with those who understand the point and see its necessity. And they are the nucleus. We could call this the microcosm of a larger coherent culture. If we could establish such a microculture, this might spread. However, we cannot establish this through an agenda with a definite end in view, because this will already be a distortion. It will lead to distortion by the unconscious motives that bring about resistance. For example, the people who thought of establishing socialism made an attempt to confront this problem, but all the unconscious motives of self-centeredness resisted it and it never really worked. I think people will sooner or later discover that capitalism does not work either. Just look at our ecological problems. We must really do something different. If we could establish a communication in which all these unconscious motives could be explored, all this might change. What we need to be able to do is to talk to communities. And the UN are not discussing the basic issues at all because they are really not negotiable. They are negotiating the small points that people are ready to trade off, but we cannot come to a common policy that way. What is needed is dialogue in the basic sense of this word, which implies that meaning is flowing through and amongst people rather than an exchange where each person tries to win by making his or her view prevail. Dialogue, therefore, means creating something new where everybody wins. The basic idea of dialogue is to be able to talk while suspending personal opinions, as it were, holding them out in front of you and the group for all to see their coherence or incoherence, while neither suppressing them nor insisting on them nor trying to convince or persuade others of their value. Instead, we just want to understand. In a way, this is comparable to allowing the scientific spirit to infuse our communication. We need to have a kind of scientific attitude when we talk. It does not mean that we're doing laboratory experiments, but for the most part, we are listening to the opinions of all, whether they are pleasing or outrageous. That is the essence of the scientific spirit. We're just listening. We can do it. In this art of dialogue, the first priority is to see the whole meaning of everyone without having to make any decision as to who is right and who is wrong. It is more important to see the whole meaning than that any particular opinion should prevail. Because seeing this will create a new frame of mind in which consciousness of all has a common content. The content being all these opinions at which we are all looking. The other person's opinion is looked at the same as mine is. It means a common consciousness that is coherent. It is a kind of implicate order where each unfolds into the whole consciousness and the whole into each. With this common coherent consciousness, we have a new kind of intelligence capable of thinking together. Usually people in a group do not think together. Each one has his or her own idea and tries to get it across, even though he or she might sometimes accept a part of someone else's opinion. In thinking together, however, one person will have an idea and it may pass to the next person who will pick it up as though it was their own, and it will go on like that, just almost like one person thinking. The idea does not belong to anybody. This requires complete trust, which develops only if we are able to get through all the obstacles to dialogue, these unconscious motives of self-centeredness that I have mentioned. I do not want to give the impression that this will be straightforward or easy, but I think if people see the necessity and are serious about it, we could do something. We can have this common consciousness, this intelligence. This fellowship is, we have a common bond of impersonal fellowship or participation. This fellowship is one of the more powerful feelings that there is. I read recently that many people used to find something good in war because they experienced a valuable comradeship that they could never get in civilian life. They were ready to go through all the horrors of war to gain this, but we do not need a war to have fellowship or comradeship. That is one discovery that we must make. With this common consciousness, people could create a coherent culture, which implies a coherent mind and body for each individual as well. What underlies such consciousness is this infinitely subtle spirit which cannot be defined, out of which emerges the ultimate meanings in ways which we cannot see or grasp. This infuses the whole with a coherent but dynamic and creative meaning. This spirit is in some sense one, undivided. It is so subtle that we could say little about it, but it is essential to consider the possibility that it is there. If we try to say that it is not there, we will go over to mechanism in the end. We will then be left only with material values which cannot move us to the creation of a coherent and meaningful society with a coherent approach to nature. The subtle but dynamic spirit that I have suggested unfolds into many aspects, including the scientific, artistic, and religious, and would bring about a different way of living, both individually and together, which would move toward an unbroken whole. It would allow creative freedom to the individual that is not imposed, but would arise naturally. People would see the necessity of it and see that it is so much better than the other way. Since wholeness, health, and holiness are the same root, and since sanity has basically a similar meaning, it would imply the health of the body, mind, and society, and of course the spirit beyond.